and welcome to Dregs of Wisdom with Andrew Tanner.
Hey everyone, welcome to Dregs of Wisdom, episode 13, lucky 13. We have an amazing guest for you today, a friend of mine and colleague in the yoga world, senior yoga teacher, Todd Norian. He is an ERYT 500. He's also a certified yoga therapist. He's been a trainer of yoga therapists, and he is an internationally acclaimed yoga teacher, founder of Ashaya Yoga. He's author of Tantra Yoga, Journey to Unbreakable Wholeness, a memoir, book that I'm also reading right now, which is not just a memoir, but also like a workbook. It's actually really cool. We'll get into that. Todd is also an accomplished musician. He is an acharya in the Blue Throat Yoga lineage. I believe that's a tantric lineage we'll learn more about. And a Kripalu Legacy faculty. So Todd is certified in as a Phoenix Rising yoga therapist, and he used to train them as well. He's also a senior Anusara certified teacher. Todd has been immersing himself in all of these different yoga traditions and teaching them today. I have had the pleasure of taking a class with Todd about 14 years ago when I was at Kripalu, and I can honestly say that I felt at the time I was in the presence of a master, someone who is a master of their craft. So Todd, it is so great to have you here. We're going to get right into it. But before we get into that, my first question, very important. Why was Bartolomeo Cristofori such an important influence in the 1700s of Europe? And if you were alive today, what sort of yoga do you think he'd be doing?
Well, because I know absolutely nothing about this great being of historical, wonder, I would say that as long as he was following his heart, he is worthy of the greatest riches of life.
Well, it's interesting. We did stump you today. We always start our podcast with a stumper question, and knowing that you have this background in, I think you're a classically trained pianist, right?
Yes, yeah.
So Bartolomeo Cristofori is the founder and inventor of the piano, the modern piano.
My God.
And I think he'd be doing Ashaya yoga. So.
Oh my God. Well, you learn something new every day, and I'm humbled and excited to know the founder of the piano. So.
Okay, well, for real this time. Honestly, thank you for agreeing to be here, and I've been really enjoying your book. There's so much to talk about there, but maybe before we get into some of the thoughts in your book, you began your yoga journey at Kripalu. Is that
I began a little bit before. In 1980, I had my first yoga class down in Miami, Florida.
Okay, but so how did you transition from, what brought you to the ashram, I should say?
Yeah, well, that's a great story. So I was a classically trained musician. I was studying at University of Michigan. I was always talented in high school, but I wasn't a prodigy. And I found that out sort of to my despair when I got into music at a collegiate level, university level, high level university. And the competition was just too much. My heart just wasn't into it, but I was always into jazz and pop and rock. So I decided instead of dropping out of music totally, I would follow my heart, go into jazz. I found a school in Miami, went down from Michigan to Miami, and fell in love with the jazz scene down there. And I found out that there was a yoga studio right across the street from the university. And I had previously been in touch with a very old friend who I hadn't seen in years. And we connected back in Michigan before I went down to Miami. And he was glowing and radiant. And I asked him, what are you doing? He said, oh, I live at a yoga ashram. And I said, what's that? And he told me about Kripalu. And
who was it? Can you say?
Yeah, it was Dan Levin.
Oh my God, Dan Levin.
His mom and my mom went to high school together.
No way.
And we've had this incredible journey where he's been, 4 years ahead of me. And I followed him even up to the point of moving out of Kripalu, buying a house in the same neighborhood. And our journeys are just sort of intertwined in a very
Wow.
Fascinating way, I would say.
Shout
So
out to Dan Levin if you see this. He's the creator of was it Let Your Soul? No. What's his dance? He has a dance yoga.
I forget exactly what he calls it, in motion or something like that.
Oh yeah, it's a meditation in motion practice that incorporates dance and yoga. It's a beautiful practice. Yeah. Shout out to Dan Levin, great guy. Tell us more. So you were taking this class in Miami.
Well, that imprint of seeing someone in full vitality. I mean, he was bright, but he was also relaxed. Like there was a certain, I mean, I think there is a transmission that comes through each of us, like when we're practicing. But I think for him, because he was so immersed at that time in the Guru Shakti and the lifestyle and all that, that I think I received, I'm just going to, let's pretend for a second. I received a soul transmission unintentionally from him that stuck in my heart. It moved me to Miami. I got curious about the word yoga because I'd never done it before. And that took me to my first class. And it was an Iyengar studio, Iyengar Institute of South Miami, which was very prominent back then. And for 2.5 years or so, I studied Iyengar. And then I would go up to Eastman School of Music in the summer, driving from Miami, up to Rochester, New York. And you go through Pennsylvania, and the ashram.
They were in Pennsylvania then?
At that time, in 1982. So I stopped off on my way home, visited my friend Dan. He welcomed me. I was only going to stay for 2 days. He said, there's a course called The Quest for the Limitless You. It's a 10 days. The first time we're running it. You ought to check it out. So since I was there, I signed up for this Quest for the Limitless You. And I went to the 10-day course and stayed for 13 years. And I called my professors from the payphone at Kripalu then and canceled my fellowship. I was given a free ride to do a master's course in jazz education. And I never looked back, Wow.
I mean, that's an amazing, that moment must have been hard for you. Like, what was it like calling your professor and then calling your parents to tell them you were not going back to your free ride of college? You're going to be at this yoga ashram.
All right. Well, you have to kind of get the context. I was 22. I was completely in love with yoga, starry-eyed. I had just found out what an ashram was, what yoga was, and also what a guru. I had no idea what a guru was. And I just came out of 10 days of deep immersion in the Guru Shakti. Every cell of my body was ignited with this deep longing for evolution and for sort of the possibility of humanity in a way. And I felt it's like what awakened in me, my heart blasted open. You can read about where that landed me because I was so outside of myself in this bigger universal spiritual context that I couldn't ground. And, I was picked up by my uncle and aunt who lived in Philly, and I spent 10 days in the Philadelphia psychiatric hospital.
Oh, I haven't gotten there in your book yet.
Oh, so. Okay. I don't want to spoil it for you.
Well, I mean, it's okay to have some spoilers because because you stayed there for 13 years. I don't know. I was also in a high demand spiritual group. That's what I like to say instead of cult. But I was also spent the first 5 years of my yoga experience in that sort of a group. Yeah. And I was started when I was in college, and I actually had gone to Korea and done all this Taoist training on a mountain. And I was planning to quit college, and I called my parents. I did the thing you did. Oh, man. But they came to New York and threatened to disown me, and they forced me to finish school. And we compromised, and I finished school while living with my guru. But you were willing, you had the guts. How did you deal with, were your parents supportive? Was there a conflict there that you had to get over?
Oh my God. My dad wanted to sue the ashram. Yeah. I mean, okay. So they were going through divorce at that time. And there's so many layers of why I did what I did, seeking a family because mine was breaking apart. Who knows, but I think I was heart moved to open. And I think we can only do that when there's a readiness inside the soul of the individual. It was not a conscious intention. I was just following my heart, doing the next thing because it felt good and because it felt right. And it was good for me. I mean, we can't always do what feels good to us if it's destroying our health. Yeah, I felt really good, but so everything lined up for me. And so it just seemed like I was vibrating at the highest frequency with this newborn purpose that felt like my soul calling. And it was effortless actually to align with it. And that's why I had to do what I had to do, which was change my life. And it influenced me. So, all right, this is spoiler alert. So I write this in my book too. The night before the course was over, I finally got the courage to raise my hand in satsang, because the guru back then would always do like a chanting and then teaching. And then, does anyone have any questions? And for nights, I wanted to raise my hand and I just couldn't. I was so shy. And finally, I just did little thing, and he kept looking at me. And
immediately
he knew I had a question. And as soon as my hand wasn't even all the way up, it was like a quarter of the way. He said, "You." So I went up there and I just told him, like, I love it here. I really opened my heart. I feel completely at home, like I have a soul calling. But I said, I have a contract with the university. I have to go back and do my master's degree. And it's 2 years. And he looked at me. I don't know if you knew the guru there, but
you're talking about Amrit Desai?
Yes.
Yeah.
And his eyes could penetrate so deep, and his smile disarmed me. He had this little crack in the space between his two front teeth. Anyway, and I write about this because he didn't look anything like my grandfather. I come from a Jewish background. I say I'm Jewish on my parents' side. But he had sort of like a big nose, and he just said to me, "So what's in the contract? 2 years, 2 years is too long for me to wait." He said that to me. And my heart just burst open. I felt flutters everywhere. And it occurred to me that I'm free. I'm free to actually choose the destiny of my life. And that was the next day. Sort of like the guru gave me permission. Now, whether that was the hook and he was reeling me in, that's maybe for another story.
We've got to talk about gurus today. There's so many questions about these gurus that, not spoiler alert, but for anyone that doesn't know yet, Amrit Desai, founder of Kripalu Ashram, and maybe you can tell us, he was certainly, sleeping with students and doing all kinds of things, but he was also this incredible, majestic guide, as you've described.
Yeah.
Let's just get right into it. I mean, maybe, so obviously from there you decided you were going to stay.
Yeah.
I'm sure we're going to get to this. So let's keep going with the story. That gave you the freedom to realize, like, oh, I am free to make my own decisions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that awakening gave you the strength to talk to, was it harder to talk to your parents or to talk to the school?
Oh God, I don't know. I think harder for my parents, but I did call the school and they couldn't believe it, because it was 3 days before the semester was going to start. And then, they were planning on me. They had me, booked in all these classes, and I even had students and everything. But you know what? I think what happened is, can we say I was blinded by the light? I mean, I was intoxicated with God force. I call it joy force now. And I think when any of us opens the heart to that extent, and every cell of your body is saying, follow this direction, you just have to do it. I know people that suppress that, and I know people that are not following their heart, and it's like another kind of a journey, and I respect it. But for me, it was a soul calling. So on that level, it was effortless. Talking to my parents, oh my God. Okay, so my mom, who's very loving, she was just so surprised. And finally, like, she was asking me, well, are you happy? I mean, really, that's like the loving parent. What they want is that their kids are healthy and happy. And I said,
Right.
yeah, Mom, I am so happy. I know this is what I want to do. And she kind of said, well, I guess then, okay. My dad was way less forgiving, and I don't even remember talking to him. But I know that he wanted to sue. And, but over the next couple of years, as I got more and more grounded and seated in myself and a little bit more seated in the world, I wasn't in this sort of manic phase of, God consciousness, where I want to transform the world. It was like, no, I really started to integrate the teachings. I was able to go back and visit my parents and be a catalyst for their opening and their understanding. I helped them actually, like, my mom was holding so much resentment against my dad for leaving without saying why he was leaving. My dad was not a great, he was a communicator, but I'd say, he didn't really know how to express his emotions that well. And she was able to let go of her resentment because of the talks she and I would have, really deep, soulful talks. I was telling her, resentment is not the way to get back at him. Like, I know you want him to suffer because you're suffering. I said, but the best way for you to release the suffering in yourself is to find a way to release the resentment. You don't think about forgiveness yet. Just see if you can leverage a little space between you and the hurt that you have in there. And sure enough, over time, they became friends. Like, they could be adults together,
It's interesting how, I think a lot about like yoga and spiritual groups, cults, this kind of thing,
Yeah.
Are they good? Are they bad? I think that sort of thinking is very juvenile, actually.
Yeah.
There's a lot of debate in the yoga industry, like, this yoga is a cult. This is there's predators and all this stuff. And it's like, it's not good nor bad, black and white. There's clearly a lot of skills that you were learning through being part of this group that, it
Sure.
sounds like you had extremely positive experience. I would love to hear more about, first, you mentioned briefly a minute ago that there was a moment where maybe too much Shakti and you kind of got ungrounded and needed
Yeah.
psychological support. But then
Yeah.
it sounds like you went back. Can you walk us through that whole thing? And
Yeah.
let's just go right into the whole cult story. This is the most fun stuff.
Oh God, I'm glad I
The
can laugh.
dregs of wisdom can be found here. This is what I believe.
Right. Let's just say that in my God intoxicated consciousness, I was guided to do things that I don't really regret now, but they were out of the ordinary because I was having an out of the ordinary experience. And at one point, I was guided by spirit to go behind the ashram, up the hill to the top of the, it's not really a mountain, but like top of the ridge, we could say. And there I communed with the divine, and it guided me to become natural man, which means no clothes, no anything. I was wearing contact lenses at that time. I peeled everything off that was not me, contact lenses, clothes, everything. And I proceeded to walk back to the ashram naturally, natural man, to a celibate ashram. Okay. So, all right. So, and I had to walk across the street, public street. Now this is way out in the country. So, I don't remember cars. I don't remember much of anything. I was doing the naked yogi, sort of in communion with God consciousness walk.
See, I read the part in your book about streaking with your friends in the shame section, but this is totally different.
Well, that streaking, sort of the nudity theme, crops up at different places. I tried to run the different themes in different contexts. So
you get back to the ashram, you're just naked. You're like,
right.
Just full of spirit, full of light.
And
were you not eating? Do you remember? Like, do you think you were in what? Yeah, I think there's this fine line. I have not a lot. I have some friends who are not well-known famous yoga teachers, but who have experienced very deep states of consciousness.
Yeah.
And who describe, there's like a knife edge that you can walk sometimes when you're doing these practices. Would you say retrospectively, was that a non-healthy version of yourself? Was it a necessary thing to experience? And well, please keep going with the story, but love the commentary as you go.
Yeah. When I look back at my journey, and this is one of my practices that I do, I try to look back with gratitude to see that every experience that I had in my past is what has made me who I am today. So if I were unhappy with who I am today, I might look back and be unhappy with some of those experiences because I would be in this state of non-acceptance, or in a state of lack, in a state of less than, in a state of non-gratitude, which has a lot of implications about my outlook on life. But because of all the practices and the yoga and the teaching, and especially the non-dual Shaiva, Shakta, Tantra that I study, we want to learn how to transform regret into gratitude, or grief into gratitude. And an example of grief is we focus so much on what we've lost. We need to. That's the first stage of grief. And you have to feel all of that, the 5 stages of grief, or however many stages there are. But ultimately, at the end, the most conscious practice of grief is to transform grief into gratitude, to acknowledge what you lost, but also to acknowledge what you gained. Like when my dad died, I couldn't experience my grief. Then I did. Then I felt loss, tremendous loss. I wasn't ready for him to leave. But then I started to focus on all that he gave me. And he bequeathed to me his positive and negative qualities. But like focusing on the positive, I got so much wisdom from my dad. He played baseball with me. He gave me, he did so many things with me to sort of raise me. So I started to appreciate all of that. So my grief that I was holding that was so heavy suddenly turned into gratitude. And I think through grace and through our consciousness, we can transform. I mean, it's part of what my purpose is now, is I'm here to transform pain into beauty. And yeah, go ahead.
No, please. No, I was just, I had marked a part in your book that I wanted to ask you about, and it relates exactly to this. You wrote that empathy, your capacity to have compassion for your lesser self, like the stuff you did in the past that you regret, perhaps, or that one might regret, and your suffering, you wrote, it heals and diminishes shame. So in other words, having empathy and looking back on your past with compassion is what heals the shame. It's what transforms that shame experience in. And my question to you was, and you just shared, like through grace, through realization, I had written in the book, does self-realization, and we can parlay the terms, is that what leads, the purpose of yoga, is there something about an opening of awareness of your true nature, that your true nature is everyone and everything, that it is unity, and that awareness creates the wisdom and the insight to go back and look at your past experiences, and you basically heal your entire past through how you view the present.
Bingo.
Okay.
Yeah, that's Andrew. That's totally beautiful. That's it.
That was you. That came from you.
Well, yeah, but you recontexted it. Here's the thing. Fate is what's given to us. Destiny is what you do with it. And in the philosophy that I study, and in the sort of life practice that I try to emulate, we have agency. And the ego is no longer the obstacle. The ego becomes the gift of embodiment, because it's through me really embracing my unique, individual, one of a kind, weird, quirky personality or life is what opens the passport to spirit. I don't think we can go to spirit negating ourselves. I think we have to experience spirit in us as us. We are that. So our human emotion is divine emotion. That's the rasas, which means, we are rasikas. We are tasters of life. And the goal of yoga, at least in my perspective, is we want to become the connoisseurs of life, to savor the experience we're having. And that's called Ananda Tandava, is the dance of bliss, because the yogi, we want wildness without savagery, fury without anger, and urgency without anxiety. And if you happen to experience savagery, anger, and anxiety, that's Tandava too. The Tandava is to be wholly in the state of your state. And I think that's what I experienced with that initial heart opening, is when we can become, I'm just going to say it, possessed by the state of our state. Suddenly we're in the present moment, unveiled by our conditioning. Unveiled.
So in that moment, when you kind of were speaking to spirit, guided to become fully yourself, you took off your clothes, you took off your contacts. Do you feel that is that a state of consciousness maybe that you aspire to continue to reach again? Or, how does it relate to, was that the peak experience? And I'm very interested if you can share the consciousness experiences that have been peak and the insights that they've given you.
Yeah.
I'd love, what insight do you get from that particular state? And because you mentioned that led to some unstable places. So
right. Well,
tell us more.
I do enjoy taking my clothes off. Let's just put it that way.
Who doesn't?
That
sounds good.
Okay. So, I think, the experience I had when I look back now from the knowledge that I have now that I did not have then. Back then it was spontaneous. It was not pre-thought. And when I was taken to the hospital because I lost my car keys, because I had no connection to physical reality. I was sourced in the spirit. Luckily, I had people to help me. And I write in the book, on my way from the ashram to the hospital, I'm in the backseat of my uncle's car, I was having these revelations of being one with everything. And I had to pee. So what I did was, the car was moving. I did not ask to stop the car. I just opened the door, and we happened to come right at that second to a stop sign. I get out in the middle of Nowheresville, Pennsylvania, and I look, and there's a farm, and there's mud everywhere. It's like a hog farm or something. And I walk up, I see the farmer working on his tractor, and I said, "Hey, can I use your bathroom?"
Were you naked still?
No.
Okay.
I had clothes on. No, when I came onto let me finish that. I'll finish that story in a second.
Please.
But sidetrack. When I came onto the property naked, the administrator, thank God, who is, a guy, he found me and whisked me into the brothers' barn right away.
The brothers' barn.
And that's where the brothers slept. That's where.
Right. I know.
It was really rustic back then. Okay, so then he said he realized right away that I was having a God conscious experience, and immediately called, my parents and got the whole thing set up. They had to fly out. No, they called. How did
they didn't try to stop. They didn't try to settle you down, or they weren't capable. They didn't feel the ashram couldn't handle it. They didn't have the.
I felt like if the guru and Don Stapleton, who was he was one of the directors. It was Samadarshan and Gita, the Sanskrit names of the two leaders. Yeah. That next day, when the program was over, they had to leave with the guru to go do a seminar on the road somewhere. So it was like there was no sort of spiritual support. At least no one else there could provide it. So yeah, I think that was, perfect, but also, unfortunately perfect, because my journey then went to Western medicine. I had support even then. Like my uncle called sort of a psychic person that he had known about. And she came and she understood Kundalini, and she understood like what happens to the mind and the brain when you're having a spiritual experience. Yeah. So I think of it as I had a spiritual emergency. I absolutely needed support that I was not getting. Right. But then when I was there, like no amount of drugs stopped me from having the catharsis that was going on. And they had to put me in this secluded room. Mantras were flying out of me. Pranayama was flying out of me. I lost control of, my bodily functions. That was going on. I was in a huge cathartic, out of control, Shakti's in charge, not me, experience that landed me in a new self. And I was in the hospital for exactly 10 days. The program was 10 days. I was in the hospital for exactly 10 days. And I walked out of there a brand new person.
Did you go into any manic and then depression, or was it just all Shakti, 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 and then kind of you grounded?
Yeah, it was all Shakti. I'd never had an experience to that extent before, partly because I could control it. I could be aware. I'm going to let myself go this much. And then when I started to feel that little bit of ungroundedness, I would close it down. I say, okay, ground. I need to ground. So I started doing vigorous physical exercise. I did more asana rather than meditation.
So you started balancing yourself.
Yeah. And they did give me, like I had to take lithium. I think lithium is like it's the balancer, to stabilize. It cuts off highs and lows basically.
Interesting. And so when you were released, did you get a prescription for lithium? Like how did you, and how long did it take to kind of get back to natural, or what happened?
Those 10 days when I was at the ashram, I was actually there for like 12 or 13 days because I was there a couple of days visiting my friend before I went into the program. And I had never eaten vegetarian food before. And I loved it, but I shifted my diet. I lost 22 pounds. I mean, I'm skin and bones now. And 22 pounds was like, crap, like that's, so I probably had just the right amount of physical imbalance to release the spiritual energy in me. And so part of my recovery, I went back to my aunt and uncle's house in Philly. They fed me chicken for like 2 weeks. Yeah. Okay. So I went back to, a more high concentrated protein diet, which really helped me. I gained weight back. I gained strength. And I think I was left with this burning longing to go back to the ashram, but they put me on the awareness list.
What does that mean?
Which means you can't come back because you're a psychological legal threat to the organization. They screen people, or used to back then.
No way.
I was on the awareness list. So I go down to Miami. I go back to Miami. And I did, gigging. So I played like on all the hotel, bar mitzvahs, weddings and all that along the Miami Strip. That's how I made my money back then. And I got into all these other spiritual things. I did Sufism for a while. I was in a group called the White Brotherhood that the focus was the Sacred Heart of Christ, the Sacred Heart of Jesus. That was on my altar for months. I studied that. It was basically the Aquarian gospel of Christ as a yogi, which, I don't know how much validity there is, but the teachings were so close to sort of the yogic, process, the yamas and niyamas, like all that stuff just was making sense to me. And then I decided to sign up for a Kripalu seminar with the guru. I didn't know that I couldn't go back to the ashram. I didn't know I couldn't go to a workshop with him because he came down to Leesburg, Florida every year. So I drove up to Leesburg, and the administrator, this different administrator, saw me and kind of grabbed me by the scruff and said, "You can't be here." I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "You're on the
You're on the awareness list."
She said, we're calling your father right now to get permission for you to be here. Because I think at that time, like, my dad was pursuing legal action against the ashram.
Oh, okay. So I get it.
Yeah.
Now I understand the legal action a little more.
Yeah.
But so what happened? Where did you stay at the thing, or did you?
He was so gracious. He, understood, and he said it's fine for him to be there.
Wow.
There's a lot of stories about how my dad came around to actually respect me. He had to go through his own growth and everything, but he came and visited the ashram once and saw me teaching. He said, "I want to come to your class." I said, "Dad." So in the teacher training there, we used to do month-longs, and we would fast and then do a rebirthing class. Rebirthing was really big back then, which was like transformational breath work. It's a similar thing.
Yeah.
Said, "Dad, if you come to the class tomorrow, there's going to be so much catharsis and all that." And he goes, "I can handle it." Like, he was up for it. So he and his wife come to the class. They go through the whole rebirthing exercise. I'm leading it.
You were leading it.
At the end, they fell into each other's arms. They were holding each other, crying like babies. They had just guided each other through the, partner guided transformational breath. There were 80 people in the class. I called everybody up around the platform in the center. I was in the center. I said, please share your experiences. My dad stands up, grabs the microphone from me, and he said, "Butch," which is funny.
That's what he called you, Butch?
My childhood name, Butch, because I grew up.
What was your Sanskrit name at the time?
Manu.
So everyone knows you as Manu. He's like, "Butch."
He was just nuts. He said, "I may not accept your choice of lifestyle, but I recognize a master teacher when I see one. I love you." I fell into his arms. It was like, I didn't even know I really needed like my parental approval.
Blessing. Yeah.
A blessing. He gave it to me there. There was not a dry eye in the room because of the Shakti. And I've always felt this with my dad. We have a blood primordial connection that we both acknowledge, but we're different. We're real, we're different, but we're the same there. And the way that he let himself be vulnerable and say that was a big part of the healing of my own shame, in my journey. So,
that reminds me something that I learned from another master teacher, Sarah Joy Marsh, who is a yoga therapist. And I studied with her for a bit when my kids were really young. And when you start learning about shame and all this stuff, you kind of become obsessed and like worried about every little thing and how you're raising your children and whatnot.
Sure.
And she said to me that no matter what you do, as long as a parent, you repair it.
Yeah.
As long as whatever the rupture was, if you repair it, there's no problem. There's no karma. All is forgiven. And it sounds like that moment for you was just that deep repair.
Yeah.
For all that the first part of Todd's book is all about shame and a lot of the experiences of his childhood.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. What you're saying is, I don't know that I finished saying this earlier, but I started saying it, which it's not the experiences we have, because the journey of becoming an awakened human being goes through challenge, goes through pain, goes through trauma, either with a capital T or a small t. It's trauma. So it's not the experiences we have, it's the meaning we assign to the experience that we're left with. We are all living in the meaning that we have assigned to every single experience we've had leading to this point. And that's why I can sit here with an open heart and gratitude with all this trauma that I had and just look back with gratitude and say, that was a hell of a ride. And I do that consciously because we die the same way we live. And if you live with regret, you're going to die with regret. So we need to release this regret. It's a pattern. It's a samskara. It's an imprint. And nobody teaches us how to release the pattern of regret. Well, maybe some people do, but we're not so well versed. This is the yoga of emotion. I want to be a master of the whole being, physical, mental, and emotional and spiritual. So for me, the yoga of our emotions, do you have emotional agility, or do you brood, or do you bottle? Bottling is, I'm not going to feel this. It's too intense. I'm going to put it in a bottle on the shelf for later. Forget it. There's no later. You just bottled a part of yourself over there. And inside that bottle is your creativity and your passion. Or we brood.
You can't bottle an emotion without bottling a beautiful part of yourself as well.
Yeah.
You can't bottle up pain without bottling up you can't bottle the dark without the light.
Yes.
How do you help? How are you helping people? How do you see Ashaya Yoga as the vehicle for people, to make these transformations that we're talking about? That the ability to live life in the way that, the tantric philosophy you talk about is very similar to the Taoist philosophy.
Yeah.
How do you help people with that?
I think it starts at the most expansive, vast position of consciousness. And that is, we are the crystallization of the divine's desire to know itself. We're all gods and goddesses in drag, according to Hafiz. So our journey is to awaken to the universal within the individual. That's the highest practice. And I don't care what method you do to do that.
Sorry, say that one more time.
The highest purpose of the practice of yoga is to awaken the universal within the individual. In other words, self-knowledge. This is as God as it gets.
This right here.
This.
Yep. I dig it.
Okay. So to get that, we have to understand where we came from. Everything in the material universe comes from the sky, from stars, because elements are forged in stars, and the actual building blocks of this stuff is stardust. So if we can, sometimes we have to pretend. Okay, let's just pretend that that's true. Let's pretend that we are really the living embodiment of the divine consciousness seeking union with itself. Okay, let's pretend. We have to employ our imagination. Okay, Carl Jung had it complete. The imagination is where everything is possible.
Yeah, I think, what's his name? He says, I'll remember who said this in a minute, but he said, God splits himself or herself or itself up into infinite pieces in a giant game of hide and seek. And some of us figure out that we're God, and then we get to keep playing.
Right. That's so beautiful. It's right.
That's what you mean, though, right? That you're saying that realization, that knowledge, that understanding, that's step one, you're saying, for this kind of path of healing.
Yeah. So I start there. So Ashaya Yoga is a vehicle then to integrate body, mind, and heart. How to understand that when you engage with the body, when you align yourself really well with the science and nature of how these joints can flow optimally, then you're aligning with a bigger energy. you know? So Ashaya is based in the 5 elements, earth, water, fire, air, and sky. And each of these elements has a particular manifestation in the body. So sky in yoga is take a deep breath, soften your skin, remember who you are. Remember that you are part of this vast, infinite nature. Like if we come from the infinite formlessness, then if we take a piece of that infinite formlessness, that piece contains infinity. A piece of the infinite is still infinite. And we have to kind of do a little somersault with the mind because, no, that's an individual piece. Yes, it's both. It is an individual piece and it's part of the infinite. So the non-dual, this idea of oneness, is so full and complete that it includes duality.
So this reflection on infinity, was that something that led to an insight for you about, like you mentioned a moment ago, God, this right here, the plainness of the desk that I'm sitting at, everything, just this, you know, we're not in some exalted state naked on a mountaintop. It's this, the realization that this is as God as it gets. Did that come for you through reflection on infinity as a concept, reflection on non-dual? Like, was it the reflection process? When did that awareness come to you? And how do you help others get that?
Well, I had the first starburst at Kripalu when I had that cosmic experience that was unsustainable. And I figured out how to ground myself in that. And it wasn't until many years later, I founded Ashaya in 2011. And I had to go through 3 tremendous betrayals.
Right.
It was the fall of...
I know. So number 1, Kripalu, actually, please tell us the betrayals. I'm sorry.
Well, as great as the ashram community was, the enforcement of a celibate community while the founder was having the time of his life, having sex with whoever the hell he wanted, was just, it was too big. It just sucked. I mean, it was just like, you know, how hypocritical can you get? And then you spiritualize it. You know, it's not like, you know, we were one big family. And in that kind of family, there's a kind of spiritual incest, a spiritual incest that was like intolerable. So I'm so proud of the community because the management at that time fired the guru.
That's amazing. It's one of the most amazing stories. And you know Matthew Remsky, the writer? He has the Spirituality podcast. He wrote a book about the Ashtanga sex scandals and whatnot. And one of the things I learned from him about cults and cult dynamics, and it's not like necessarily the act of the guru having sex with a student or someone doing something like that. The biggest issue is the deception. It's the being lied to. It's the betrayal that one feels when the story, like you said, the stories we tell ourselves about the past and the present are what fuels our reality. So if the story is one thing, but what's really happening is another thing, it's that betrayal, that disconnect between the stories that is what makes the pain.
Yeah. And I think, you know, people that, you know, the fallout from that, everyone has their own opinion and their own special quality of hurt. And for me, I really took charge of healing what I needed to heal. And then, because I met with the guru one-on-one, I met with him afterwards.
Really?
You know? Yes. And he was in his street clothes, and how the guru always used to wear a robe, but he wasn't wearing a robe, and how the guru always sits higher. We went upstairs in this private home where we could have privacy. There was one pillow on the floor. He gave it to me. Now I'm sitting higher than the guru, which was a sign of him being humble. And his words to me were, "I'm so sorry for the pain I must have caused you." Wow. Okay, so like, let's just take a deep breath. I burst into tears because that's exactly what I needed to hear. And then I had more to share. And although he tried to listen, he snapped right back into his guru role of teaching. And
that was his highest.
He could not. So did he rehearse that line and practice it because he was coached by his lawyers? That, you know, who knows? But I take him at his word. It was sincere. But here's my learning in that. You can't get blood from a stone. And stop trying to make him your therapist.
Or stop trying to keep your guru when he's obviously pushed you away.
Yeah.
You know, like he's, you know, if you never leave the guru, I think that can be a problem.
Yeah. So I had some growing up to do. And when I look back, because then the same thing repeated again with the Anusara tradition, 15 years I gave in service there, which was all great. I mean, this is not a complaint, but I'm making my case that if you have not been betrayed, just wait.
If you have not been betrayed, just wait.
and when you experience betrayal, and there are betrayals with a capital B and a small b, it happens, then what I learned is how to transform the betrayal from an impasse to a rite of passage. So when I look back, Kripala was a rite of passage. Then Anusara, the same, different circumstance, but the same idea, where the deception, the duplicity, and the refusal to step down. I was on his ethics committee. It's so crazy. We coached him. We pleaded with him. We begged him to step down and seek counseling and just admit, and he refused. Right after that meeting, I didn't. Like, my resignation was later, but so many people said, okay, that's it, I'm done. Because they could not support a liar.
Are you talking about Amrit, or are you talking about John Friend right now?
I'm talking about John Friend now.
Oh, with John Friend.
You know,
sidecar, who do you think had more fun, Amrit or John Friend? So yachts, limousines, or some Wiccan sex orgies? Which one?
I think John Friend did, because I think Amrit had a lot of shame about it, because he had to. Well, I don't know. They both sort of had shame around it, but
really,
anyway, I just have to say, who cares? But
I know.
The point is, what did I take away from those experiences? Because we can't stop those kinds of experiences from happening. Yes. And what I took away, and what I encourage everyone who's listening to this to take away, is that you are empowered. You have the capacity to reclaim your heart and to reclaim your goodness and the power of your intention that's full of light and full of hope and full of promise, and to keep, trust yourself in that, follow that, because that's what I did. And if it wasn't for those two big betrayals, I would have never founded Ashaya Yoga. But because that happened to them, I said, I'm not following another teacher like that ever again.
But so how were you ever afraid in founding your own yoga school that you would become like these men, that kind of,
yeah, I mean, yes and no. I think, how do we hold power is a really big part of my practice. If I'm not doing my own shadow work, I have no business being in a seat of power, because I will abuse that power. But because my whole method in Ashaya is, we are physical divine beings, let's figure out how to align ourselves in the poses and do good, healthy practices, diet, exercise, all that, to keep this physical conduit as healthy and strong and open and youthful as we can. I am a divine emotional being. Let me figure out how to manage these emotions such that they support me, they uplift me. And managing the emotions is to embrace the full spectrum of who I am. And guess what? I'm shadow and light. Deepak Chopra said, if you think you don't have a shadow, you must not be standing in the light.
That's good. That's a good line.
I'm not afraid to admit my faults, and I'm the first person to take myself off the pedestal because I'm not on a pedestal. And if someone puts me there, I kindly ask them, please take me off. And then,
Do
and then
people
I
call you their guru?
No, they don't. I won't allow that. And anyway, I'm so weird. Like I talk about like the weird things that I do that most other people, do, like my feelings of unworthiness and all that. So people, I think, relate to me because they see that I'm a flawed human being, and I have shifted from a perfectionistic attitude where there's an enlightenment,
right,
which is the finish line. Let's go there. And anything less than that is inferior. I've shifted from a worldview of perfectionism to a worldview of non-perfection, which is perfect. So I live now and I tell myself I am perfectly imperfect, just as I am, and I'm constantly getting better,
Do you remember when you had, we talked about this earlier, but that awakening, so you've had these highs, you've had, I'm sure as a spiritual practitioner, a yoga practitioner, you've experienced many bliss states, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like you mentioned, I used to believe that enlightenment would be just the ultimate bliss state,
Right.
like 500x whatever I've currently experienced or something, right?
Exactly.
But through practices, a different awareness arises, a different insight arises, one that says, actually, there's infinite bliss states, there's infinite hell realms. So where's there to end?
That's
except
right.
for where you are right here.
Yes. And that leads to eventually, this is a duality, so both are true, is we shift from being seekers to being finders. Within the realm of a finder, seeker is embraced. But it's exactly what you're saying. You're not going after the carrot. You're going for the going.
Right.
And we do have little carrots here and there. Like I climb peaks in my meditation practice all the time, but I know that the bliss is not the end result. I come back, it's another feature of the practice of, living a yogic lifestyle, basically.
Yeah. And it talks in various yogic texts. I'm curious if in the tantric text it talks about not getting attached to sattva. In the Bhagavad Gita, it talks about, even that you can have attachment to sattva, the pure state. And I think overcoming that is the realization that you're talking about.
Yeah, beautifully said.
Exactly. Most people who don't practice yoga or don't have a spiritual practice, they have to overcome the addictions to or attachments to tamas, eating a bunch of crap and living in a kind of darkness, or their attachment to action, rajas. And then the yogis, that we think that we're better but there's also that attachment to sattva. I see that a lot in some yoga.
Well, we have to go back to the definition of the gunas, which is qualities of nature. The Prakriti, which is all the material world, must function through these three capacities, which is, tamas, which is, slower, heavier energy, darker energy, rajas, lighter, energetic, radiant, and activity,
active,
and sattva, which is really the state of balance. And so in the Tantra, we're not trying to get away from tamas or rajas, that actually sattva is the right use and the alignment of the gunas. For instance, at night, we want tamas.
That's true, yeah.
To sleep, we have to darken the room, slow ourselves down, steady the mind, So tamas really serves us. And then in the morning, when the alarm goes off, tamasic, I always hit my sleep at least once, but usually twice, because I'd rather sleep more. But then, the sun comes out and it's like we get up and it's like activity. So we want more rajas, more tamas at night, more rajas in the morning. And sattva is the consciousness or awareness through all the various degradations between tamas and rajas. So it's the same thing with the 5 elements. Same thing that I'm doing in Ashaya is we're not trying to go beyond nature into the supernatural. That's what we did at Kripalu in the early days. Why?
Right. You were trying to go beyond the body into the supernatural.
Because the gurus, they were renunciates. Bapuji was, the grandfather guru was a renunciate. What is renunciation other than a rejection of the world? And the whole definition of samsara shifts in the classical tradition from samsara, meaning the disease of worldliness, to the tantric view of samsara, which is not to be bound by the spirit. Sam is bound and sara is spirit. But sam has a different context in the tantric tradition, which is samsara. Sam means to be held by the spirit or by the worldliness, to be supported, to be nurtured. Samsara is how we're nurtured. So the Tantra that I teach is a householder path. We're not going for a one-way ticket up and out and stay there. It's a round trip, like we transcend and we come back. And I think what you said was absolutely true. We want to sort of keep the reflection of this blissful transcendent state, even as we go through our daily routines and our interactions with people. We would like all those interactions to be sourced from this higher power, higher wisdom. And that's really the ultimate use of all this philosophy is, how to become better human beings in a way.
For sure. So after you help people get this awareness through, and I think part of it is listening to conversations, reading about it, study, and then you have them change their lifestyle, their habits through the practices, healthy living, etc.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned also the emotional work. Is that part of Ashaya yoga, or do you recommend people work with therapists? Like, where do you go with there? I notice your book has kind of like questions that people can answer for themselves to do the emotional work. But just like we have a guru with, yoga asanas and pranayams and things, do you feel like people need gurus or therapists? Do you feel like therapists are not helpful? Curious where you are with all that.
Well, let's start with saying it takes a village to raise a yogi. I really believe in making the best use of supportive tools on every level that contemporary society offers us. So that's therapists, that's medical science, that's whatever it is that you resonate with that helps you gain insight and stability on the path. So the emotional component in Ashaya is also sourced in the philosophy. And I do use some of sort of the most inspiring books that have been for me and the inspiring teachers and coaches in how to work with these human emotions. Like for shame and guilt, I go right to Brene Brown. And she has some podcasts and things I've listened to for years that are really excellent. There's an author that she interviewed named Dr. Susan David with her book called Emotional Agility. Fabulous. You want to learn how to be master of your emotions? That's the book. So I've taken segments from Brené's teachings, from Dr. Susan David's teachings, and many other, psychologists. I try to keep myself studying and informed. And I've put them into a yogic context based on getting connected to the heart. So Ashaya means abode of the heart. So my path, the method is really sourced in how to follow your heart, because that's been my journey. How to attune to the wisdom of the heart, how to notice when the heart shuts closed, how to observe if you have your shield up, if you're living in this state of constant protection because you're afraid of being seen or you're afraid that you'll fall apart. I ask, when we study the water element, which is all about the flow of the current of grace and our emotions, that we need to let these emotions flow, because when we do, it's like water, it goes around obstacles. And if you have too much earth in your life, you're really stoic and rigid, and you need to move. Like, you need to flow, because we tend to get really stuck in earth. So there's way more I can say about the elements. But the thing is about the water is, I lost the thread, but I'll try to recapture it. But
talking about flow and just go ahead. Before that, you were talking about kind of therapy and emotional intelligence, and
yes. So then to learn how to have emotional agility. And I kind of said a little bit about how to transform our grief, so we're not living in the sadness of grief longer than we need to, you know? So a lot of it is, I've created exercises. I put a bunch of those exercises in my book, but like in my teacher trainings, I bring like two people, we get together in dyads, and we focus on how to listen with our hearts. And so we have a speaker and we have a listener. And the listener's job is to open their heart to the speaker without any judgment at all, and to make space for whatever it is they're saying. And when you feel your heart close, or when you feel like you want to fix or advise or somehow change that person's experience, you make a mental note of that and try to let go of needing to fix them, because in the eyes of grace, which sees with full compassion, there are no mistakes in life. There's no way to do it wrong. There's only learning. And the idea of no mistakes goes right along with my jazz training, because in jazz, there's no mistakes, only solos. And so
the conscious listening, I think, is a powerful skill. I just literally, with my son last night, he was coming down the stairs crying about something, and I was in a good place. And so I could just listen, not trying to, what's wrong? like just waiting, letting him feel my presence, letting him, just giving him my hand, kind of waiting for that moment, and then after he took my hand, oh, what happened, Toby? And trying to make it, and letting him say, what his sister did to him, which whatever it was, she wouldn't let him read her book, and then just listening and nodding, not saying, well, that's bad, that's good, that skill of listening. I learned that at Kripalu. As the first step. And was that something they were doing back at Kripalu back then? Or is this something you got?
It's a variation of what they call co-listening. But I learned a lot of heart skills at Kripalu. I got so much value, because Kripalu, even today, like in its essence, is a path of the heart. And like my, Ashaya, Ashaya really took the rigor of alignment principles from Iyengar.
Right.
And the softness of the heart and spirituality of Kripalu. And then I added sort of the secret sauce, which is the Tantra philosophy, into what for me is a deeply integrated path of wanting to learn how to live as yogis in the world. That's really it.
Right. Because Kripalu was always a mishmash. They didn't really have a clear philosophy like in the beginning, this is as an outside observer, I
Yeah.
felt like Amrit Desai brought in all these amazing different ideas and teachers, and you guys
Right.
would learn from him. Like I heard a story that, he would bring Bikram over and they do Bikram for a month. You'd all, like, or he brought, so you guys all had this very eclectic, I say you guys, the people that were at the ashram and then kind of in part, just there was
Yeah.
so much interesting stuff that you all were doing, but I don't know how integrated it was philosophically until maybe much later, maybe now. So the idea that you kind of found the philosophy that truly took the good and let go of the bad and integrated that, I think that's important. I think yoga gets better over time. I'm not this guy that believes these great traditions were perfect and then they've been passed down to us and we're trying to uphold them. No, they were whatever they were, and we're making them more perfect through our efforts.
Oh, I love that, Andrew. You don't subscribe to the golden era idea.
I mean, there may have been a golden age in the past, but whatever it was, it got so far into the darkness that whatever we got, the dregs that were left behind, we're just piecing them together and building back to another golden age.
Yeah.
Anyone who says they know exactly what was the 5,000-year-old teaching or the 10,000-year-old teaching, I say bullshit. And in the Tao, they talk about the ancient masters. In the Vedas, they talk about the ancient masters.
Yeah.
But they don't talk about them from direct experience.
Yeah.
So I do think there's a possibility that there was some greater teaching. There was some golden ages, but it was certainly lost, and we're building back to it.
Yeah, I totally align with your viewpoint. There's another term in the Tantra that is similar to that. It's an assimilative path. So Tantra is really good at taking the best of everything that came in the past, because in Tantra, we recognize Patanjali as one of the root systems of yoga. But for most yogis, Patanjali is the Bible. Like it stops there. And, Patanjali wrote those sutras around 450 CE. Tantra starts around 300 CE. And Tantra utilizes those sutras to take them further. I mean, Buddha was before that. Buddha was like 563 before the Common Era. But what I'm saying is that, like you were saying, that I think yogic consciousness has evolved into these concepts, going from the classical duality system where there's Purusha and Prakriti, where Purusha is superior, to Shiva and Shakti in the Tantric tradition, where they are intermingled. They have threads that contain, like Shakti is Shiva's face in the Shaiva tradition, like that. And there's traditions that are even further, that like basically Shiva, it's not patriarchal at all. There's no patriarch. In fact, the best position for Shiva is dead on his back and Kali is standing on top of him. And it's symbolic of this, like overcoming the ego, and also it's more like embracing the ego for the nurturing capacity of the goddess of consciousness. So Tantra becomes this matriarchal, meaning material, this divine sourced in material, and then it's through the material. It takes the mortal to experience the immortal. We have to go through our limits to experience limitation. We have to go through concealment in order to even know what revelation is. And this is the play of consciousness. This is the dance.
Right. Without being lost, we can't know what it means to be found.
There you go.
I can't help myself. I know we're like, Scott, my producer's probably like, time, Andrew, but like you mentioned 3 betrayals and we've only covered 2. And I was thinking Shiva and Shakti, what's the third one?
Well, I won't say that I was betrayed by a person, but I was married for 27 years to the girl of my dreams. We met and married at Kripalu. We co-taught teacher trainings. I mean, I was manifesting the life that I had dreamed of. And then something happened that I could not control. And that is, she became ill. And it wasn't a physical illness. I think if it was a physical illness, things would have been different. But it was a deep serious mental illness. And she became a different person. So I hung in there for 8 years, in and out of different psychiatric hospitals. We tried everything. The therapist finally determined that she was therapy resistant and met, what is it called? The prescription resistant. Like nothing really helped make the shift. And there were some episodes that I say a little bit about them at the end of my book. Of course, using
pseudonym
and all that. Just to my point in sharing that experience was to share what I went through and how that transformed my heart again into having compassion, and then deciding to set a boundary for myself, that it's not required for me to go down with the ship, that I still, even though we're united through marriage, we're merged through marriage, I still have a responsibility to my own joy and my own happiness.
Are you still married? And
No, I filed for divorce in 2018, and then
2018.
It took a long time because she was, deemed incompetent to stand trial, which in the mental health field, then you need a conservator and a legal guardian, divorce attorney. She had a criminal attorney. I had to pull out a restraining order against her. There's a lot of ugliness that happened that sort of shifted my perspective on that. So I had to let my heart be crushed. And it wasn't until some years after that, maybe, well, really just 2 years after that, that I realized the human heart is in fact resilient. And that even if our heart has been crushed, we are designed to love again.
Is she, by the way, I'm thinking back, I took a class with the two of you in 2011. Is there a moment that you remember? Maybe that was the first time you taught Ashaya yoga even.
We started to sneak it into the Kripalu training because we were so excited about it. But I think that might have been earlier because we started it in 1997. We trained with John Friend.
No, when did you start teaching Ashaya?
Ashaya was in, you said Ashaya. Yeah. Ashaya was in 2011.
Yeah. So it was maybe 2011, 2012 that I took your class.
Yeah.
But getting back to that, was there a moment where things shifted? And that must have come as such a weird shock, or was there, and if it's too personal, you don't need to share, but like, I'm sure you've thought a million times about how could this happen? Does this happen to people? I mean,
I know.
Like, what do you think could have been the cause of the change in her? Because I'm so shocked to hear this.
I know. Well, it took me a long time to realize that this can happen. It did happen, and it does happen. And I think it's just, I think it has a lot to do with genetics, and it has to do with attitude, inspiration, and karma. For me, yogically, it's like, I still love her. I've told her that, but I can't be with her, and I've offered my support, and she's, I think two people have to be ready. But I will say that shortly after that time, she did start to get better, and I reached out and we met. And I'll never forget it because it was at Tanglewood in May, it's not quite busy and crowded with tourists yet, that comes in June, July, and August. But it was so gorgeous, and they had just fixed up all the grounds at Tanglewood. So we met on the Tanglewood grass, They're so beautiful out, and it was warm. And we sat across from each other. And this is, we had been married 27 years. Spiritual, like we already had a deep knowing of each other. And we studied Tantra together. Like there was all this incredible wisdom. She brought remorse, and I brought forgiveness. And we expressed that to each other. And I don't know if you know, but like when remorse meets forgiveness, there's such a beautiful sort of receptivity to recognize the pain and the suffering that we shared. And in this moment, we're okay. And we embraced, we cried. I mean, I think we made the best of it. We're making the best of it. And I think that's all anyone can do. You do the best you can. And then really examine the meaning you're assigning that, because we're living in the meaning that we're taking away. So for me to say, I can still be in love, I can still love someone, but not be in love with them anymore, and to shift, to move on. And that's the journey of life. And if you don't move on, there's more work to be done. We are meant to move on. And when you move on, like I moved on with the blessing of the gift that relationship gave me, even the blessing of the pain that we both suffered during that time, what that gave me, because it did make me strong. I had to learn how to hold my center and be a pillar of support for someone, and then be a pillar of support for myself, and make the right decision. That's not always the easiest decision,
Well, I really thank you for sharing that. And, I wish her the best as well. And it's great to hear that there's been some movement in the positive for her. This has been a really amazing conversation in general. You're going to be teaching at the Berkshire Yoga Festival. So anyone watching this, we're really excited to, connect with Todd. I will put all of his links in the show notes and stuff. So if you're interested in Ashaya Yoga and studying with Todd, you can check it out through there. I feel like I could keep talking to you for hours. I have so many more ideas about stuff in the cults and stuff and just the spiritual teachings. But I feel like you've given us so much today, and maybe we'll have to bring you back again. Anything you want to leave us with as a final dreg of wisdom to pass on?
Just let me say, Andrew, you're amazing. And I love talking to you. It's like, you're like the best friend I've ever had. And because of the depth of your path, we have parallel paths. In your experience, we can actually connect to the heart, the deepest heart of the teaching, and then inspire each other with our unique perspectives. The angle that you're seeing it inspires me to no end. So I think it was a spontaneous combustion. That's what I think. So
I got a lot. I totally agree. And I'm very grateful. And thank you. That means a lot from you. So,
and my last blessing to everyone would be just always follow your heart. Like trust yourself, trust your heart, because, it's the spirit is in you, through you, as you. And everything in life is for our awakening. That's what helps keep me in line. So thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity.
Amen. Namaste.